I was standing under the Shaharah Bridge in Yemen, staring up at a stone arch that shouldn't exist, when the local guide said something that stopped me cold. He pointed at the massive stones suspended 200 feet above a canyon and said, "No foundation, just rock touching rock. Been here 400 years, maybe more. No one remembers who built it. No foundation." I laughed. Had to be a translation error. Every bridge needs a foundation. That's engineering 101. You can't just stack stones in the air and expect them to hold. Except I was looking at exactly that. A bridge with no visible foundation, no support pillars driven into the ground, no anchoring system, just perfectly fitted stones forming an arch across a void that would give modern engineers nightmares. And it had been standing there for centuries. That was the moment everything I thought I understood about bridges fell apart. Because the Shaharah Bridge isn't unique. It's not even rare. The more I searched, the more I found them. Ancient bridges across the world, built with no foundations, no support structures, no anchoring systems. Just stone on stone, held together by nothing but geometry and gravity. And every single one of them has been standing far longer than any modern bridge. No one talks about this. No engineering textbook mentions it. No historian addresses it. It's just quietly ignored, as if acknowledging these bridges would force us to confront something we're not ready to face. That whoever built them understood forces, weight distribution, and material physics in ways we've completely forgotten. Let me take you to Spain, the Puente Romano in Córdoba. They call it the Roman Bridge, except when you examine the construction, something is terribly wrong with that story. The bridge spans the Guadalquivir River with 16 arches. Beautiful, ancient, supposedly built by the Romans in the 1st century BC. But here's the problem. There are no foundations, not Roman foundations. Not any foundations. I spent 3 days there with a structural engineer friend. We examined every arch, every stone, every joint. We looked for evidence of foundation work, of supports driven into the riverbed, of any anchoring system that would explain how this bridge holds itself up. Nothing. The stones just rest on the riverbed. Natural rock, no excavation, no reinforcement. The bridge literally sits on the river bottom like a sculpture, held together by nothing but the precision of its own geometry. My engineer friend kept saying it was impossible. His exact words were, "This violates every principle of load-bearing architecture. The weight distribution is all wrong. The lateral forces should tear this apart. It shouldn't be standing. But it is. And I can't explain why." We checked the historical records, construction documents, engineering notes, anything that might explain the technique. The official story is vague. Roman engineering excellence, advanced for their time. But no specifics, no blueprints, no descriptions of how they built a bridge without foundations, just empty praise and zero technical detail. And then I found something in a dusty archive in Madrid, a report from 1850. A Spanish civil engineer named Don Rafael de la Viesca had been commissioned to study the old bridges of Andalusia. He examined the Puente Romano in detail. And buried in his report, in a section marked as irregularities requiring further study, he wrote this: "The bridge displays no evidence of traditional foundation work. The structure appears to rely entirely on arch compression and stone precision. This technique is unknown to modern engineering and cannot be replicated using current methods. Origin of this knowledge remains unexplained." That report was published once and never referenced again, as if someone decided the question was better left unasked. But I kept asking. I went to Turkey, the Malabadi Bridge, built supposedly in 1147. spans the Batman River with a single massive arch, one of the largest stone arches ever constructed. 68 feet of empty air held up by curved stones. And when you go underneath, when you examine where the bridge meets the canyon walls, there's no foundation. The stones just start at ground level and curve upward. No anchoring, no support structure. Just perfect geometry creating a shape so precisely calculated that it holds its own weight and everything that crosses it through pure compression force. Modern engineers call it an empirical arch. That's their polite way of saying they don't understand it. Empirical means built through trial and error, through experience rather than calculation. But here's the thing. You don't build a 68-foot stone arch through trial and error. One mistake and the entire structure collapses, killing everyone underneath and wasting years of work and tons of irreplaceable stone. You build something like this because you understand exactly what you're doing, because you have mathematical precision, because you know things. I found a thesis from a Turkish engineering student written in 1982. She had studied the Malabadi Bridge for her doctorate, measured every stone, calculated every angle, analyzed the load distribution. Her conclusion was devastating. Quote, "The bridge demonstrates understanding of parabolic arch theory and gravitational load distribution that predates the mathematical frameworks used to describe these principles by approximately 600 years. This suggests either impossible coincidence or inherited knowledge from an unknown source." Her thesis was rejected, not because the math was wrong, because the implications were unacceptable. She was told to revise her conclusions to fit historical consensus. She refused. She never got her doctorate. The thesis exists in a single copy in the university library in Ankara. I photographed every page. The pattern kept repeating. Czech Republic, the Karlštejn Bridge, no foundation, just stones precisely fitted onto natural bedrock. Italy, the Ponte del Diavolo in Borgo a Mozzano, no anchoring system, just an arch so perfectly calculated it holds itself through geometric compression alone. Iran, the Zhaozhou Bridge, multi-tiered arches with no visible support structure. China, the Zhaozhou Bridge, built supposedly in 605 AD, the oldest standing bridge in China. No foundation work, just flat stone laid on compressed earth, holding millions of pounds through nothing but arch physics. Every continent, every culture, the same impossible technique. Bridges built without foundations, standing for centuries, outlasting everything modern engineering builds with steel, concrete, and computer calculations. And no one explains how. The official story is always the same. Ancient builders were very skilled. They had good intuition. They learned through experience. But that's not an explanation. That's an excuse, a way to avoid the real question. How did ancient builders across the world, supposedly isolated from each other, all develop the exact same technique for building foundationless bridges? A technique so advanced we can't replicate it today even with all our technology. Unless they weren't isolated, unless they were all part of the same civilization. A global civilization with standardized engineering knowledge. A civilization we now call Tartaria. I know how that sounds. Conspiracy theory. Fringe history. Except I'm standing under these bridges. I'm looking at the evidence. I'm reading the reports from engineers who admit they can't explain what they're seeing. And the explanation that makes the most sense, the only explanation that accounts for the global pattern, the identical techniques, the mathematical precision, is that someone came before us. Someone who understood structural physics so deeply they could build bridges that hold themselves up through pure geometry. Think about what that means. Modern bridges need foundations because we don't fully understand load distribution. We over-engineer everything. We drive supports deep into the ground because we're not confident in our calculations. We use steel reinforcement because we don't trust stone. We build with safety margins and redundancy because we're working with incomplete knowledge. But these ancient bridges, no safety margins, no redundancy, no over-engineering, just perfect calculation, minimum material, maximum efficiency. As if the builders knew exactly how much force each stone could handle, exactly what angle created perfect compression, exactly where weight needed to be distributed. They built with such confidence that they didn't need foundations. The bridges themselves were the foundation. I went to Bosnia, the Stari Most in Mostar, built supposedly in 1566 by the Ottomans. A single perfect arch spanning the Neretva River. No foundation. The stones just rest on the canyon walls. And here's the part that should be impossible. The bridge was destroyed in 1993 during the Bosnian War. Deliberately targeted. Blown apart. When they rebuilt it in 2004, they used the original stones, the original design, the original technique. Except they couldn't do it. Modern engineers with computers and laser measurements and material science couldn't replicate the original bridge. They tried for months. The stones kept shifting. The arch wouldn't hold. Finally, they brought in old stonemasons, traditional craftsmen, who still knew techniques passed down through generations. And even they struggled. It took 2 years to rebuild what the original builders had created in 9. And the new bridge isn't quite right. It's close. But engineers admit it doesn't have the same structural integrity as the original. A bridge built in 1566 was stronger than a bridge built in 2004, using the exact same stones. How? How is that possible? Unless the bridge wasn't actually built in 1566. Unless it was older, much older, and the Ottomans simply maintained it, preserved it, took credit for something they inherited. I started looking at the dates. Every ancient bridge has an official construction date, but when you dig into the actual evidence, the dates are always vague. Built sometime in the 12th century, constructed during the reign of Emperor so-and-so, attributed to architect whoever. Never specific, never documented. Just best guesses based on architectural style or historical context. And in almost every case, there are references to older bridges on the same site. The Puente Romano in Córdoba is supposedly Roman, but Roman texts mention an ancient bridge already present when they arrived. The Charles Bridge in Prague is officially 1357. But construction records mention utilizing existing foundations. Except we just established these bridges have no foundations. So what were they utilizing? Unless they were restoring something already there. Something already ancient when medieval builders found it. The deepest I went was Peru, the Queshuachaca Bridge, a rope bridge rebuilt every year by local communities, in a tradition they say goes back to the Inca, except the Inca only existed for about a century before Spanish conquest. This tradition is older, much older. And here's what's strange. The bridge location corresponds exactly to Inca road system integration points, as if the bridge was already there, already part of a continental transportation network, and the Inca simply inherited and maintained it. But it's the technique that haunts me. The Queshuachaca uses no anchoring system. The ropes are woven in specific patterns that create structural tension. The bridge holds itself up through balance force. When I watched the local builders work, I noticed something. They didn't measure anything. No tools, no calculations. They just knew. Hand over hand, weaving rope in patterns passed down through so many generations, no one remembers where it came from. And the bridge holds, every year, perfect tension, perfect balance. Knowledge embedded so deeply in the tradition that it functions without understanding. What if all these bridges are like that? What if the knowledge of how to build without foundations was passed down through generations, surviving as tradition long after the understanding was lost? What if stonemasons across the world are still using techniques from Tartaria, still building the way they were taught, even though no one remembers why it works? I found something in an archive in Florence that made my blood run cold. A manuscript from 1489, a collection of builders' notes, techniques, trade secrets, and buried in the middle, a section on bridge construction. It describes the foundationless arch technique in detail, the precise angles, the compression ratios, the stone fitting requirements. But then there's a note in the margin, written in different ink. Later edition, it says, "These methods are old knowledge. We preserve them but do not understand them. The masters who taught us learned from their masters, who learned from theirs, going back to times before record. We are told these techniques come from the old builders, though none know who they were. The old builders, Tartaria, the civilization that came before, the ones who understood stone and force and geometry so completely they could build bridges that needed no foundations. Bridges that held themselves up through pure physics. Bridges that have outlasted empires, religions, languages, cultures. Standing silent, testifying to knowledge we've lost, and we're destroying them. In the last 50 years, dozens of ancient foundationless bridges have been demolished. Structural concerns, safety upgrades, insufficient load capacity for modern traffic. But when you look at the bridges being destroyed, they're still standing, still functional, still stronger than the modern replacements. The Shaharah Bridge in Yemen is scheduled for replacement. The Malabadi Bridge was almost destroyed in 2015 for a new highway. The Puente Romano has survived countless floods, but is now threatened by modernization. Why? Why destroy bridges that work? Unless someone doesn't want the evidence to exist, doesn't want people asking how ancient builders achieved things we can't do today, doesn't want us wondering what else we've forgotten, what else was taken from us. I don't have all the answers, but I know this. When you build a bridge without a foundation, and it stands for 1,000 years, you're not lucky. You're not guessing. You know exactly what you're doing. You understand forces at a level we've lost. And if we lost that knowledge, what else did we lose? What other techniques? What other understanding of the natural world? These bridges are trying to tell us something. They're screaming it. Proof carved in stone that someone came before us who knew more than we do, who built better than we can, who understood this world in ways we're only beginning to remember. The foundationless bridges of Tartaria, still standing, still impossible, still ignored by everyone who should be demanding answers, but not by me, not anymore. And if you've made it this far, not by you either. Because once you see a bridge holding itself in the air through nothing but geometry, once you understand that we can't build that today, once you realize that knowledge was deliberately lost or deliberately hidden, you can't unsee it. The bridges remember, even if we were made to forget. They stand there, impossible and perfect, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Not how they survived, but why we stopped building like that, why we forgot, and who benefits from our forgetting.